Good morning. It's a pleasure and a challenge to be here. The challenge is that today I have to talk about work that I've done over 20 years in 18 minutes. So that is a challenge. So I'll begin soon. I started out as a journalist. I trained to be a journalist. And one of the first lessons that I learned about writing a good story was the so-called rule of 5. Whether the story that I wrote covered the 5 W's, which is the who, what, where, when, and why of any particular event or incident. In time, I learned to include the solitary H, the question of how. I'm no longer a journalist. The focus of my story today is not an event or an incident. It is about journalism and about media itself. The who, what, why, where of contemporary media and the news choices it makes. In other words, who decides what news is and what news is not? Where to look for it, where not to look for it? When does a story come onto the front page of a newspaper? And why should it be reported in a certain way and not in any other? And I'm going to talk about these questions in the context of a newspaper called Khabar Lahariya, a rural weekly newspaper. Khabar Lahariya, as the name translates, is about making waves. Waves that carry news and information from the remotest villages of India, and particularly what I'm going to talk about today is Khabar Lahariya that comes out from North India in the state of Uttar Pradesh. There are 6 print editions that come out from the badlands of Bundelkhand, the inaccessible tracts of Faizabad, and the flood-prone villages of Varanasi. These are not places that you will easily find on a map, on a road map of India. And these are not places where you will have people begin their mornings typically by reading a newspaper. These are areas that have escaped the light of India's thriving and burgeoning media. Something that might seem difficult for us to imagine given our media-saturated lives, with our internet, our television, our mobiles. It is true that technology and news media is penetrating the Indian internet. If you look at figures of 2013 and 14, you will see that there are 95,000 publications that are registered with the RNI, the registration of newspapers in India. We have close to 400 news channels currently on television that are functioning and beaming out news and information to people. And we have approximately 87,000 million mobile users today in India. So clearly, there is an expansion of news and information into the hinterland. But is the glass half full or half empty? If I look at the readership survey of 2010, I see a sharp divide, which is not represented in the figures that I'm giving you, which I gave you earlier, in terms of the urban and rural access to media and information. We have only 13% of the population, rural population in India, that has access to any printed matter. We have 0.8% of the rural population that has access to internet, which is so much a part of our lives today. And we have, if we add up television, radio, print media, we have 47% of the rural population that does not have access to any form of media, be it print, television, or radio. So, the challenge is tremendous, and that's where Khabar Lahariya locates itself. It connects this media dark world with news and information, countering the responses and claims made by local administration or by politicians or by the powers that be to create a loop between the two. But the unique thing about Khabar Lahariya is that it actually places these tools in the hands of the communities themselves. It pulls the rural and semi-literate poor into the circle of information. Khabar Lahariya is not, I would like to clarify, it's not a broadsheet, which is bought out by development workers. It's not a newspaper that's bought out by urban, educated, academic, intellectuals, or activists who are really interested in the local and want to highlight it. It's not that. It is a newspaper which is bought out by an all-women team of 40 barefoot journalists who are reporters, who are editors, who are hawkers themselves, and who are photographers themselves, who come together to produce this newspaper. The readership of Khabar Lahariya is entirely rural. 80,000 readers, 6 editions, covering 600 villages. And the other important point is that Khabar Lahariya possibly is the only newspaper in India that produces news and reaches news to its rural readers in their locally spoken language. It comes out in 7 languages. Only one of those languages is part of the official schedule of languages that are recognized by the Indian state. 6 of them are considered dialects. So it is producing news in so-called dialects. It has a news portal and it uploads its stories, its news onto that portal in those locally spoken languages. So I'd like to introduce you to Khabar Lahariya. I'd like to take you into the world of Khabar Lahariya. It is inspiring, but I'd like to ask you a question. And the question is, what is the news you are reading? Are you getting the news that the KL reporter, the Khabar Lahariya reporter, is gathering from Hagolan village? What would it cost to have that news in your newspaper? And who will pay for the travel of Sunita to Hagolan regularly? If you look at the price you pay for your newspaper, it is a mere 2 rupees. And you get 2 dozen pages. Seems to be an inverse relationship between the price of our newspaper today and the cost of production. We know that globally the price of the paper on which news is printing is increasing phenomenally. There is a staggering difference between the price you pay, the production price, and the cover price of that paper. So who is paying that price for the news that you are reading? And the answer to this was provided by the promoter of India's largest media conglomerate, who famously said, "We are not in the business of producing news. We are in the business of advertising." Today, news has given way to advertising in India's mainstream media. There was a time when the front page was sacrosanct. It is no longer so today. Often, you might be getting your newspaper with the front page being a full-page advertisement. Not only this, we are part of a new phenomena which is called paid advertorial news, which is that companies pay to promote their products to you in the form of news. It comes in the form of supplements, in the form of additions to the newspaper that you get every day. So has the paper become a product itself, pushing, introducing, and seducing us to buy newer and more products and consume more? There is a little and not so well kept secret that lies at the heart of media in contemporary market democracies such as India. With a bit of poetic license, you could call it media's double life. And this double life arises from a structural dynamic, which is that free media everywhere in the democratic world is largely privately owned. And it is meant to uphold public interest. In other words, it means that media organizations are private corporations that are meant to function like public trusts. There is a contradiction there. So what would happen and could happen if we were to reverse some of this? If we were to make news and not commerce the focus of producing news and information? If we were actually to register a public trust? And if we were actually to get rural voices to make the news that they would want to read and listen to? Khabar Lahariya is about this. It is about democratizing media. Democracy is not merely the mechanics of getting your executive, legislative, and judiciary functions to work perfectly. It is about having a media that is by, for, and of people. And as a result of this mindset, I'm coming to the nitty-gritty of the fact that the focus of Khabar Lahariya is on gathering news, to track stories, to cover stories that are seen to be too local for mainstream media to be covered. And the important point here is that Khabar Lahariya pays its journalists a salary every month to gather news. It invests in their travel so that they can go and visit places where corruption, where state amnesia is not covert, it is live and palpable. And they bring news that advertisers may not be very interested in promoting. It runs counter to mainstream practices in media today, which are primarily concerned with the phenomena of stringers, where you have stringers who earn their keep not through gathering news. And these are stringers of national dailies, regional dailies, who are gathering news as a part activity. Their main activity is to gather advertisement revenue, and they earn commissions, and that is how they survive. Who produces the news? We talked about those 40 women. These are women who are local women, who belong to the very communities that media has bypassed, who represent those voices. Embeddedness and not distant objectivity is the guiding principle. The idea of the mighty reporter has been questioned today. We are raising questions about who has the power to represent whom. Studies across are showing that even in contemporary media today, there aren't Dalit, tribal, or Muslim reporters present in significant number in the proportion to the ratio in the population, the Indian population. We have only 12% of journalists in media who are women. And if you come to the rural hinterland, the figure becomes even less. There are fewer women in rural areas who are working as journalists. And if we move further and say how many of these women are tribal or Dalit or Muslim, we would actually come into decimal points nationally. So this 40-strong team actually consists of women who are from Dalit, tribal and Muslim communities. And through rigorous training, sustained training in reporting, in editing, in photography, they are able to play their role as journalists. Location is their strength, it is not their weakness or bias. KL breaks the urban and rural divide, it breaks the gender divide, and it also breaks the digital divide. All Khabar Lahariya journalists are trained in the internet, in computers, they are uploading, they are accessing information from different sites, they are uploading their stories, and they maintain their online portal. Being local also brings insights in terms of experiences that are close to you. In a media training workshop, a 24-year-old cub reporter lost her 2-month-old baby. The issue was that there was no doctors to attend to her little baby at the government hospital, no medicines were available. The group decided that their first edition that is going to come out in the district is going to be on the government health system. All the other editions followed suit, and they came out with a special issue on the functioning of the government hospital. The impact was that the chief medical officer of Banda district was suspended for non-functionality. There are other lots of impact stories that we can talk about. A bank manager in Markundi block was taking a cut for clearing pension payments for poor women. The Khabar Lahariya reporter got wind of it and put it into the next issue. The manager got wind of the fact that he was the lead in the next coming issue. He rushed to the reporter and requested that he be allowed to buy all the copies so that this news does not get out into the public domain. Of course, that was refused. But all stories in Khabar Lahariya are not about corruption and apathy. They are about empowerment, they are about inspiration, they are about collective action. For instance, Khabar Lahariya broke a story about an all-women work site in Basila village, where women got together, 50 women who worked over 40 days to dig up a pond, the only pond for their village. So there are inspirational stories. But being local comes with a cost. The women journalists are often vulnerable to attacks. They are by locally powerful people, they are intimidated, they are threatened. And of course, there is the classic thing about slandering women as loose women. These women move around, they are mobile, so they are loose. Local administration respects them, but also resents their questions. For women who are walking through streams, through lonely paths, through forests, it is a challenge and it requires a high degree of faith in what you do to be doing what you are. I began this talk with the rule of 5 in journalism. I have tried to give you a glimpse of how the 5 Ws have played out in the evolution of Khabar Lahariya as an alternative media space, a counterpoint to the concerns and preoccupations of mainstream media. But before I end, I want you to look at the question of how. How has Khabar Lahariya been possible? How do you sustain an intervention like that? I have to confess it has been difficult. It is our conviction that Khabar Lahariya should expand beyond the 600 villages to 1200, to 1800 and multiply dramatically. But we are still struggling to develop a financial model that can support this and does not get tied into merely promoting products for consumption. We are trying, we are struggling, and we hope that we will be able to get the news that matters out there for all of us.